White House officials are meeting today to discuss a controversial tactic being used by some Republican governors. They're sending migrants from the southern border to Elaine Quijano is in Edgartown, Massachusetts, where migrants are now scrambling for shelter after a plane from Florida dropped them off there yesterday. We're talking about Martha's Vineyard. Elaine, good morning.
Good morning to you, Anne Marie. Yes, I'm standing outside a church here in Edgartown, Massachusetts, where some 50 migrants, including several children, are now receiving food and shelter. Now, the local community here has really rallied behind these migrants, and officials are coordinating with the state to try and find them other housing as cities prepare for an ongoing political battle.
In a whaling port turned popular vacation destination, St. Andrew's Episcopal Church normally only needs to provide shelter for a few people at a time. But today it's offering accommodations for about 50, a group of Venezuelan migrants, including elderly and children as young as 4, none of whom speak English, and some without relatives or resources in the U.S. Some documented their trip, taking pictures and videos with their cell phones. This mother was told she was heading to Washington. She says, "I want my son to be safe, go to school, and have the safety we didn't have in our home country." The migrants flew in from Texas on 2 planes chartered by Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis.
We are not a sanctuary state.
Have you ever seen anything like this before?
This is an unprecedented crisis.
Ivan Espinosa is part of a team of lawyers working to help determine the next steps for the migrants who arrived in Martha's Vineyard. He says none of the migrants knew they would end up here, and that some who were in need of medical care did not receive it before leaving Texas. Some migrants say they were handed a map of the island before arriving, but were told little else or given conflicting information.
The misinformation, the misrepresentations are seen in every step of the way.
On Thursday, buses carrying about 100 asylum seekers and migrants from Texas arrived unannounced outside Vice President Kamala Harris's residence at the U.S. Naval Observatory. So far, Texas and Arizona have sent at least 295 buses with approximately 13,000 migrants to D.C., New York, and Chicago, drawing strong criticism from Democratic leaders and the Biden administration.
Republicans are playing politics with human beings. What they're doing is simply wrong. It's un-American. It's reckless.
In a statement yesterday, Governor Abbott said he would continue sending migrants to asylum cities until there is reform at the southern border. And several of the migrants that we spoke with told us that they believe they were misled. And now the district attorney here in the state of Massachusetts is seeking guidance from the Justice Department on how to move forward. Anne Marie?
I find that really interesting. I'm wondering, is there a legal argument, or what is the legal argument being made against this practice?
So, you know, it's interesting. We asked the lawyer that yesterday who is working with some of these migrants, and he said they are looking into things like kidnapping if, in fact, you know, these children that were with their parents and their families were taken across state lines. Is there potentially something there to look at legally? There's sort of a whole host of things that they're looking at, including, you know, human trafficking. That's potentially something that critics of this practice have raised. The lawyers here say they are just nailing down the facts of the stories of these migrants before they decide how to proceed. But it's interesting, Anne Marie, they're going to be working really around the clock, and they say by early next week they plan to have a better sense of what that legal strategy will be.
Elaine, you know, we saw in your piece that you spoke to the woman who came with her son from Venezuela. You know, I'm sure she is very grateful and happy to be in the U.S., but if you think you're going to Washington, D.C., and you end up in Martha's Vineyard, you're going to be very confused. No, I don't know if she was lied to or what that was about, but when you spoke to her, you know, what more did she say about just how she felt when she was dropped off there?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was incredible to hear her story because she talked about her journey just to get here, and she talked about more than half a dozen countries that she went through before even setting foot here on American soil. It was an arduous journey. They passed through Colombia, Guatemala, Panama. It was a harrowing experience to hear her describe it. But she said when she arrived here, they had this map that they had been given, right? And so during the flight, they had this sort of vague sense of, okay, Massachusetts. But she was under the impression somehow that they were headed to Washington. So there was clearly some confusion. How that confusion actually happened is unclear because that's one of the things, in fact, that the lawyers are trying to suss out is what they may have been told and by whom. Was it federal officials? Was it state officials? But what she felt, she told me, was betrayal. She truly felt betrayed at the fact that, she had been given assurances that they would, in fact, be in a position to get potentially, employment, housing, help in whatever those next steps moving forward would be in their lives. And to land and to find out that the reality of the situation was completely different was just utterly devastating for her.
Elaine, I've been to Martha's Vineyard. It is beautiful, but the first thing I thought is, where are these people going to stay? There are beautiful mansions there. You don't see very many small apartments. Are there resources?
That's exactly right. And, we talked to the community services director here on Martha's Vineyard who said when this all happened on Wednesday, she kind of looked up from her office window and saw like these people starting to just walk towards their building. And she couldn't understand what was happening. She had the very same thought is, what are we going to do? She said really within about an hour or so, she was on the phone trying to rally agencies, local government officials who would then in turn reach out to places like the Red Cross and essentially cobble together some temporary emergency housing. And so that's how this church here it really became the sanctuary for these migrants who had no other place to go. But of course, as you point out, this is not anywhere near a long-term or even a near short-term solution. And so that's why the local officials here are looking at potentially looking at this military base on Cape Cod as a place where, at least in the interim, these migrants can have a semi-permanent sense of place before they decide what their next steps are.
All right, Elaine, thank you.